So in this session, we're going to share some insights on how to develop that strong business case. We're going to talk around, of course, the importance of addressing geodetic needs, but you're going to be more familiar with those than we are from this side of the table. That is your daily business. That is your operation, your mandate. But there's a few pointers in there which we want to suggest to you that can be very useful terms and concepts to share in your business case, in that story you want to tell. We'll summarize the motivations for that increased investment in Geodesy, because these are messages you need to include in your business case, but also as you see there, communicating the needs and motivations to the senior management, to the procurement departments, but also to the partners and stakeholders in other government departments. You may have a geological department who was very interested in information about the seismic activity, the tectonic activity. Minerals and resources are also very important, and you need to work together with those industries if you're wanting to establish some new geodetic capability around that. So we want you really to open your eyes and realize that, yes, we have problems, we have challenges within our Geodesy department, but if we work together with other departments and we find and clarify how Geodesy can help fulfill a need that they have, then when you both go together and ask for money and funding, that makes it a much more successful and stronger argument for that. As Nick mentioned, we're going to have a group activity on this, but I'll just introduce that just before the coffee break, and hopefully you can start thinking and planning for that. So very quickly, some of these motivations for investment, we've heard many of these in the country reports. We want to upgrade. We need to add new stations. We need to have people who are capable of processing. We need new software or updated software, and so on. You also need to be aware that you also need to maintain and support what you currently have. That's also one of the very important things about your Geodesy infrastructure and the supply chain, is keeping what you have now operating, keeping the lights on right now. And that's also a very important factor when you are asking for investment. It's not just to buy the next shiny technology, and the next part is also to ensure that you keep what you have now running for another 10, 20, 30 years. So we've already touched here on some of the whys. Why do you need to have that geodetic infrastructure operational and running? Well, you need to stay operational. You need that for your mapping, your cartography, your disaster management, your modeling, but then also other industries need it. I've heard many discussions here about cores infrastructure is either already being established or is being established and extended. Well, there are other industries beyond surveying and mapping who are relying on that infrastructure now. You have to be able to keep that on so your farmers, your surveyors, the aviation and maritime users are able to use that. If it gets switched off tomorrow, it's not just you and your surveyors who are not able to work, it's all of these other industries that are relying on it. You need to be able to provide redundancy in your systems. You need to be able to extend the capability, whether that's densify your coverage of reference stations or tide gauges, or you may need to extend the coverage. You also need to consider about upgrading systems. You know, some of the systems you may have in GNSS reference station, as an example, some of them may only be 2 constellations. Well, of course, there is a lot of benefit going to 3 or 4 or multi-constellation receivers, because that can help you with the quality of the data and the quality of the service that you have. And also you need to consider about training your personnel so that they can use, they know how to use the latest equipment, your softwares, that they are aware and have the skills to be able to analyze, to troubleshoot. And you also need to be thinking about succession planning. Training all of the people you have in your office at the current time is one part, but you also need to build up that pipeline, bring in graduate surveyors, geodesists, so that in 10 years they can take your role as you move on or retire or whatever. You need to have that pipeline. And all of those things go into modernizing a geospatial reference system, not just receivers and software. It's all of these other parts. And that's what you also need to bring up whenever you are asking for funds. You need to explain that it is there's a human element in there to operate the information or operate the systems and analyze all of the information and get results out. So identifying the critical needs and the infrastructure and the capabilities is important. Highlighting the motivations for that funding. Yes, we will ensure that we will have capability for the next 15 or 20 years. We'll share a little bit here about how you can explore different funding options, where you can increase the net of opportunities, where you can ask for funding. And I also want to touch a little bit on where you can start to present how potential revenues can come from that infrastructure. I'm going to jump over some of these graphics because you have all of the slides to take a look at. But some of the keywords that you should be considering to use in any of your cases are things like sustainability, regional coordination, technology advancement, capacity building, because these are terms also that within governments and funding agencies, these are some of the words and terms that they like to see covered. One useful argument also when you're talking around investment for Geodesy is around what are the risks of staying where you are now without having that additional investment. And you can talk about the impact of inaccurate or outdated geodetic data. We've already had some very good examples today. For example, from Nepal, they're talking around, well, we have our datum is based on a local ellipsoid, but it means that, you know, that essentially is an outdated system. It doesn't fit in with the latest technologies, mobile mapping systems, GNSS. And bridging that gap is essentially described in this slide here. Data discrepancies, access and availability of data is also a challenge and a blocker for many other government agencies being able to use your data. And of course, as we've heard in many examples, changing terrain. If your survey marks have physically moved because of seismic activity, landslides and so on, well, that data from that survey marker is out of date. It's no longer valid and relevant. Common sources of geodetic data inaccuracies also. This is a useful part to be looking at and thinking when you're talking around how do we upgrade, how do we maintain our current systems. And you all know about that because you're all geodesists. You all know the challenges and the characteristics of the data that you have. But one of the very useful parts now to sit and think, we've got to start thinking beyond Geodesy. We've got to start and think, how does our little bit of Geodesy fit in on a national level? And to do this, I'm going to introduce a little topic here, a little exercise, a mini exercise, and is to talk about the landscape of motivators. You're thinking, okay, what does he mean by motivator? Well, I'm going to ask you to consider what are the 3 top industries in your nation? Those 3 top industries within your nation, like it or not, they motivate the government because those are the industries which are bringing in a lot of revenue, typically through taxes. So they're important to the government. Your government will also have current projects that it could be running. In my example here, infrastructure is one. Road, rail, ports, airports. Water supply is another one. Utility, that is a big government project. Many governments will be spending significant amounts of money on this. Another example is cybersecurity. You might think, what's that related to Geodesy? It is a challenge in the world today. But as you've heard, PNT, telecommunications, these and utilities, these are all affected or impacted by cybersecurity. We also find that the growth areas within a nation is also a very important factor to understand. The reason for this is that that is where governments are very interested from, let's say, canvassing votes is an interesting one because they want to be shown that they are aware of what are the latest and greatest technologies coming in. So space sector, for example, is strong growth area in many countries. We heard about Thailand, and we have the colleagues there as well around the space industry. Telecommunications. We're going into a digital world. Everything is online and smart this, smartphones, smart televisions, all of these things. They're all relying on the telecommunications. Medical research there, I've put that in. It's not necessarily geodesy related, but it's an interesting part for you to know as part of your analysis there. What are the top 3 growth areas? We also believe it's very relevant that you understand some of the challenges in your nation. And these challenges, which we've heard many of them already in your country reports, include climate change and natural disasters. These are the negative things. These are the things which are not good, but they need to be solved. Energy costs, as an example, border security. Understanding and plotting those top 3 challenges within your nation are also very useful because they tell you, or they can give you insights into what are the pain points. What are things that governments and funding agencies wanting to fix? They're not always wanting to do the things which are nice and shiny and exciting, but those challenges, they're the things, I've got to get that fixed. I've got to spend money on that. And I also would like for you to put in there the top 3 geodesy needs in your nation. We've heard many of them through there about capacity development or about geoid models, gravity, transformation parameters, and so on. Putting that on a single sheet of paper here is also very good, because what we will do later is we will work in groups to allow for you to look and say, okay, the top 3 geodesy needs that we have in our department, where do they fit in? Do they align? Do they overlap with any of those top 3 industries, government projects, challenges, or growth areas? And what we want to do then is to be able to look and try to piece those together, because if your geodesy need overlaps with one of those from all of the different boxes, then already this is helping for you to identify, I need to go and find somebody in the Ministry of Agriculture who has challenges around positioning, because potentially we can work together as surveying and mapping agency and the department or the Ministry of Agriculture to try to get a better height datum across our nation. So I'm hoping you can see that this is going to be a little challenging exercise for you, but in the next 5 minutes, I'd like for each of you as an individual, not as a team, just or as a nation, just as an individual, use that page from the, or write it down on your paper and just spend a few minutes putting what you believe are the top 3 industries, the top 3 government projects, the top 3 growth areas, challenges, and geodesy needs. You don't need to go and look on the internet or anything at the moment. It's just because then we'll ask for you to compare some of your notes with your colleagues. You could always use 5 post-it notes as well. Okay, everybody, thanks for that. I know that was a little 5-minute exercise. It went on for about 8 minutes, but I think it generated a lot of discussion. I saw very quickly there that I asked you to do it as an individual exercise. And I think you got to some things thinking, oh, what's the top industry in our country? Do you know the top industry in our country? So, well, I saw that Charisma put karaoke as a top industry, so I'm
Karaoke.
Very good. Okay, so hopefully that was a little exercise just as a warmer for you to be able to see how the world looks, how the landscape is beyond geodesy. You know, thinking around what are the top industries in my nation, in my country. The top industries are the ones who are bringing in most revenue for the government. In Australia, it's mining. Very clearly easy for us. So in Australia, as we heard from Geoscience Australia, one of the ways that they found their successes is relating the geodesy needs, where from a geodetic point they said we need to do this, we want to do this, we want more base stations into APREF and so on. They managed to find how they could tie that into the needs of the mining industry. And once you know that there's a need in there, you can then start to reach out to different departments. Geoscience is very fortunate because as part of their mandate, they look after the resources, or they have insight into those resources, which gives them a very good opportunity where they could then go out to the mining companies, the Rio Tinto, BHP, and all of those who are working in that space in Australia. But I hope this little exercise has helped you to see, okay, knowing and understanding the top three in those is very useful for helping to shape, okay, who are potential partners? Or do those industries, do those growth areas, do any of those have a positioning need? Do they need heights? Do they need real-time positioning for activities? Do they need tracking? Do they need to know where water is flowing in their activities or their challenges? Relatively small things like that allow for you to say, okay, well, yes, that industry then potentially has a need for what we're doing in improving our height data. And this is where you can start to work as part of your teams, is to go out and explore those links and understand, let's say for the around water supply, understand what challenges they have. They might be able to tell you, oh, we don't have proper charts. Our charts don't match with what our tide gauges say, or something like that. There you're starting to identify what problems they have and challenges, where you as geodesists and a survey and mapping department can potentially collaborate on. That is also a very important part, is that when you find somebody who has a problem that you feel that you can solve, you just need the money or the resources to get it, then you can work together to build that business case. It's not only the geodesy department wanting to improve the height reference system, it's also the maritime industry wanting to have better charts around their ports. And then you start to tie these pieces together and see which are the industries they impact. That's very significant. Nick touched a little bit on one of the examples he gave the first days, but for Australia, the top three industries include mining, so digging holes in the ground and taking material out. And another part of that industry is also shipping, because those raw materials get shipped off to other countries for processing. Agriculture is another huge industry in Australia. Again, bulk materials typically get shipped overseas. Well, all of that material has to be moved to ports. So rail industry is a big one, but also the ports themselves, as Nick mentioned, they want to have bigger and bigger ships coming into the port. So they need to have better survey charts, better bathy surveys done around the ports and so on. So all of these things are related. Better, safer ports with more precise bathymetric charts of the ports allow bigger ships to take more material away. And that's where the government will be saying win, win, win. So hopefully you've been finding this a useful part. I'm just going to do a couple more slides here. I've already shared here a little bit around the role of Geodesy and how it relates to different parts of industry and different talks, but this is also another very useful part when you are identifying those stakeholders who you can do that business case together with. So Geodesy is relevant to infrastructure, sustainable development. It's relevant, of course, for planning and design through those different activities, site surveys, alignment, construction. Geodesy is relevant to help with the maintenance and monitoring of infrastructure. So all of these particular aspects, structural monitoring, bridge and tunnel monitoring, they all require Geodesy in some shape or form. And all of those particular activities there are part of infrastructure projects that governments are always working on in some shape or form. Urban development. We've heard a lot about land and cadastre and how do you relate that paper that says I own this land in between these 4 coordinates. Well, Geodesy is behind that because it has to provide that valid reference frame behind those coordinates. It's the same also when new developments are being made. Again, that land is mapped, it has to be split up, it has to be assigned. Infrastructure, road, rail, drains also have to be put into that as well, all needing Geodesy in some shape or form. The environmental monitoring, that is also becoming even more prevalent and is pretty much part of any modern infrastructure project now. Climate change monitoring. Again, we've heard many case studies and examples from different nations around this. And again, Geodesy is fundamental in being able to help you provide information and insights on what has moved by how much over what time. We have some summaries and slides in here that you can look at later on, but the impact of not having Geodesy or not having relevant, current, and correct Geodesy can impact different industries in many different ways. And I summarized a few there that impact the construction, resource management, the mapping, and emergency response sectors, just examples. But the key takeaway is that insufficient investment in Geodesy can lead to safety risks for a nation, can lead to economic losses, and can lead to environmental impacts. I would say that those 3 graphics that you see at the bottom, they are a very common theme or challenge that governments have. They don't want to see their revenue and GDP go down. They don't want loss of life. And they're also aware that the impact of the environment on the residents in a nation are very critical. So why invest in Geodesy? Again, help support new applications, new industries, economic growth, again, another government tick, national security, also a topic which is gaining even more and more relevance and headlines within the media and also within governments, thinking around what are our strategy for the next few years, and environmental protection. There's also these quotes that Nick presented on the first day as well. These also are very useful when you are presenting a business case, asking for more investment in and around Geodesy, because you can provide here some very good international references about how critical that infrastructure is. In this one here with GPS, well, pretty much every nation is using GPS or GNSS in some shape or form for many of its sectors, from the smallest country to the largest country. Some other terms in here, but just before we go for the break, I'm going to jump into, a couple of points. One useful part also when you're building a business case is considering how the activity of that investment, whether it is for more reference stations, whether it is for a data processing center, or for a new office of people who will become the next generation of geodesists and surveyors, being able to relate that activity and where it could contribute to a sustainable development goal or several sustainable development goals is also strongly recommended, especially when you're going to be looking, or you could be looking to international funding organizations for some of your funding. Because this is one of the metrics that they look at and say, this request for funding for geodetic infrastructure, okay, I might not fully understand what that is, but we're going to come to communication later. But they want to see, okay, who is going to benefit from this? What will all of this technology, all of these systems and people, what will they help also benefit? And if it said this system is going to help to benefit and lead towards fulfilling a goal around clean water and sanitation, number 6, and also affordable and clean energy, number 7, and others, that for them shows that, yes, this group has thought around the impacts and the benefits of this investment. This is something that we want to do. So that's also a very important part that you should definitely include in any investment request. So I'm just going to brief you now so you can start thinking and start planning. When you come back after the coffee break, I'm going to ask for you to get into pairs. It can be with somebody from your nation. It can be from another nation. That's fine. And I want for you to work. First, I want you to help the other person identify 3 situations where geodesy investment is needed in your country. What are your geodesy needs? Then, for each of those situations, discuss where, if that request was fulfilled, which other industries or which other top 3 growth area or challenges or government projects could it contribute to? Which sustainable development goals could it contribute to? Could it help? Once you've identified that, I'd like for you to put a couple of comments about, okay, what can be our next steps for doing this? And this is the table that I want you to work in. Again, identify the 3 situations of geodesy that need investment in your country. What benefits will come once you've got that money and funding? Which motivators does it align with? Which industries, growth areas, government project or challenge? And then just start a few little points. Think, okay, what can we do to help secure this funding if I had to write a business case today? And the purpose of this activity is to start preparing you for some of the roadmap activities later on. I'm also seeing a lot of people scratching their head thinking, okay, what are the benefits? And again, that's good. So I'm just going to give a minute or two if anybody wants to share any of their example that they came up with, or anybody wants to say a few words. This is really challenging. Or maybe somebody says, this is really easy. We've done it all. Yes. So anybody wish to share any quick comments or insights? Chris.
As someone who lives in Australia and has the benefit of geoscience's amazing work, I have no idea how much any of this stuff costs, and I imagine other people might be in a similar boat. So maybe if people have some experience in knowing how much it costs to build 30 cause stations or something, that would be good to share.
Well, for our case, like we've been submitting proposals since way back. So we did come up with a costing. We base it on the proposals that we submitted before. Like for our case in the Philippines for the course densification, it costs around 25 million over a 10-year period for 200 stations. So it includes already ISSP requirements. So it's not just to establish, but also to make sure that you provide the ISSP requirements to operate the stations.
Thanks, Charisma. Now, you didn't tell me what that currency was, so 25 million. I'm gonna
Sorry, it's USD.
it's something really cheap.
US. USD.
USD. Okay, I thought you might have told me it's 25 million Bitcoin or something like that. Right? So, very good. But that's another thing. So yeah, the cost can also of a reference station or of a cause can change very differently depending on the requirements that you have for it. Yes, the receiver and antenna might be very similar in prices across brands, but then you've got to think about the monumentation, the actual construction, the installation, the power, the lightning protection, you know, all of those different things. So there's many different parts in there. So there is no one figure that you can put in there. But again, that's hopefully what you as the alumni and the community will be able to share amongst each other, your experiences around that. So thank you very much for this. The final closing remark I'm going to make about this is this type of exercise is definitely one that we see you doing further work on in your roadmap, because you have those Geodesy needs. You know, you presented in your country reports challenges where we have to densify more stations or upgrade more stations, or we want to do better local survey ties between other geodetic infrastructure. We want to build a team now to do this Geodesy. We need the softwares and things. The more partners that you can identify to work together with you and who will commit and say, yes, we will benefit from this in terms of agriculture or maritime or whatever our ministry is doing, that is a really strong partner that you should continue to work with to develop those business cases, because they will be able to provide a lot of that subject matter expertise and that industry specialism about what they need. People funding Geodesy are not geodesists. The people signing those procurement papers or reviewing the tenders and bids, they're more likely accountants or managers or lawyers. So they don't care about how many pages about geodetic improvements and vertical reference frames and fifth order polynomials and all of these things. They're not interested in that. That's not relevant. They're wanting to see a well planned out financial breakdown. They'll be wanting to see different partners involved. They'll be wanting to see the benefits of this funding hitting some of those key government challenges, key infrastructure projects, key industries, key growth areas for the nation, because that's the metrics they've been told to review every bid with. It's the same also with international development groups like the World Bank Group or Asia Development Bank. They also have similar requirements and checklists. If we don't see these terms, these benefits, these industries, we don't see climate change or SDG referenced as benefiting from this project, that's more likely that the project bid will fail. So that's why you really need to work with as many proactive, engaged partners as you can. We also had some examples in the other workshops. For example, in Côte d'Ivoire, they put a bid to the National Mapping Agency, put a bid to the World Bank Group to help establish a cause network. But in the title, in the discussions, they didn't mention anything about reference stations or cores or GNSS. Their bid essentially was ensuring land security in Côte d'Ivoire. That was the headline of the title. That was the main name for the application. Anyway, they got all of the funding. They actually got funding also for the maintenance and operation for, I believe, 10 or 15 years, because the argument around the benefits of what that technology could bring were very clearly stated, front and center. It's very important. So our final comment here is that information, that exercise will go into your roadmap, and the center, of course, is very, very open and very willing to help you draft and craft these cases as you go on. So well done. Thank you for that. And I'll pass you over to Nick now. Okay, everyone. So as Nick's loading this up,